So we're going to look at exactly how you go about constructing an experiment. Here are the steps in designing an experiment. First step is identify the research question. That can be something that's hard to figure out. You have to be able to identify something you can actually measure. So you might want to know whether something works better than something else, but that might be a research question. Really, you're going to say, well, what treatment most effectively changes the value of this response variable? So you need a response variable there to help you analyze the research question. Determine the factors. These are the explanatory variables. What do you think are the things that are responsible for the response? Those are the things that you could change yourself, and maybe then impact the response variable, and you want to determine what levels of those factors should you use in this particular situation. Determine the number of experimental units. Well, you might not know exactly, but you might want to make a guess that I'm going to do this experiment on 20 people or on a couple acres of land or whatever it is. So see what your resources look like. Ordinarily, that's the problem, that you can't just arbitrarily pick exactly the number of things that you want. You may not be able to get your hands on it. It might be too expensive. It might not just work out that way. And then determine the levels of each factor. So factors are explanatory variables you think you can control. Control meaning set the levels of. Control for other factors, the ones you don't think you can control, well, maybe you can, by assigning a fixed value. So in our headache experiment, we could say drink 8 ounces of water, because we don't want water to be one of the levels I'm investigating. Sometimes the factors you're using are the ones you want to investigate. The other ones you don't want to investigate, you could measure them so they're not looking variables, or you can control for them by assigning them values. The other way to handle the situation, if you can't assign them values, so maybe you're doing an experiment on weight loss, and you think that the amount of person is overweight is a factor in the response. So more overweight people maybe can lose weight more easily, or maybe less easily. I don't know how that works. And so you would have to account for how much overweight they are in your experimental design somehow, because that is a possible explanatory variable. We say we can control for those other factors by assigning a fixed value. We can't tell someone you have to weigh 160 pounds. That's not going to work. But you could divide the subject into groups where they're equally overweight. Okay. And then for those equally overweight groups, you could then compare different kinds of weight loss treatments in that group where they have the same amount of overweightness or the same amount of something. So it's kind of like a stratified sampling technique. You divide the subject into strata according to a possible response, possible explanatory variable, because they come equipped with some quantities that might be responsible for the response. You group them in groups where they have the same levels of those explanatory variables, and then you assign the treatments across all of them randomly. We'll see that happen later. Okay, so once we've thought about all that stuff, conduct the experiment, and then finally analyze and report results. Those are the steps in not only designing the experiment, but actually carrying it out. That's what you're going to have to do. So if you go through all that thinking, you're going to have to know, well, how am I going to analyze and report the results? That should be the first thing you figure out before you even start again. Am I going to be able to analyze and report results based on the way I've decided to set this up? And if you can't, you start over. Maybe you change the research question. Maybe you change the number of factors. Maybe you need more experimental units, you think, because you just don't have enough to cover all the possibilities. The levels, maybe you don't use as many levels, things like that. So what do we have here? So research question, factors, experimental units, levels of each factor. So those are treatments. Control by either assigning other factors, by assigning a fixed value to those factors, or dividing subjects into groups based on that level of those factors they came with. Conduct the experiment, analyze and report the results. Okay, we're good. So my example of an experiment, which I do basically every year, is my garden tomato plants. So the question is, what's the most effective way of raising tomatoes in a garden in Pueblo West? And really, the things that we can control to some extent is how much sun and how much water do you subject them to. You know, sun's pretty strong. Our tomatoes don't really care too much, but maybe they do. So yeah, I control watering because I have a watering system that's on a timer. I can control sun because I have shade cloth over parts of my garden. And the number 3, determine the number of experimental units. I'm going to divide my garden into 9 plots. Okay. And then I'm going to use for my treatment levels of each factor, water and sun. My treatments are going to be a combination of watering, daily, twice daily, every 2 days, and sun, full, 10% and 20% shaded. So here I have a schematic of the treatments. There's 9 treatments: full sun, watering every 2 days, full sun, watering every day, full sun, watering twice daily, 10% sun every 2 days, daily, twice daily, 20% sun every 2 days, daily, twice daily. Of course, with more sun, you're going to need more water. So maybe every 2 days isn't really a legitimate kind of treatment, but we're going to do it anyway so we can just compare everything. So you know in advance some of these treatments are probably better than others. From experience, my experience so far is that maybe this number 4 is the most effective treatment. But what happens with tomato plants and gardens in general is they're impacted by all kinds of things, what kind of bugs are around, what the weather's like during that time. And so we're just controlling sun and water. We can't control the other stuff. It's just going to happen to the garden. So I've got raised beds. I got 9 areas in raised beds. I can set up my watering system so that it waters these 3 every 2 days. So I can just have a row of plants here and set my hose down here that waters every 2 days, a row of plants here daily, okay, 2 days, and then up to cover a certain section of the garden with nothing, with 10% shade cloth and 20% shade cloth. I could just run it this way, I guess. I could actually do it as an official garden experiment. If you wanted to run it all at the same time, that'd be a way to do it. Or what you do sometimes is you'll try certain kinds of watering systems. Maybe you'll just run 10% shade cloth this year and try these 3 watering systems, and then next year you run full sun, try the watering systems. You can do that too. Spread that over a period of years to do the experiment. If you want to get your answers quickly, I guess you want to do them all at once. On the other hand, the year you did it might have unusual weather, so it's a complicated situation. I suppose it would take probably a combination of treatments of water and sun over a period of maybe 8 seasons before you get a really good idea of what the right thing to do is to grow the healthiest tomato plants ever. And mostly, though, maybe you don't even care about the health of them, though I kind of do. Maybe you care about how many tomatoes they make. But you know, some kinds of tomato plants make more tomatoes than others, and you might have all kinds of tomatoes planted in your garden, so maybe that's not good. But you can look at the tomatoes and see which ones look healthiest, and then you would know of the 9 treatments which treatment gave you the healthiest plants, with any luck. Unless that particular block of the garden had an attack of grasshoppers or some other kind of beetle. All these things happen in your garden, and there you go. So there's steps in designing an experiment, and a particular experiment which I do annually on my garden. I'm trying to determine how much water and how much sun is appropriate for my tomato plants. And we'll see you in a minute.